going on, guys? Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 8 of the Tinted Visors podcast. We are back after a quick break, and we have a lot to catch up on. 2 weeks into the season, we're going to have some season recaps so far. We're going to go into some who's hot and who's not segment, just talking about who's lighting it up and who's, still in bed so far in the season. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some season predictions, looking at our Instagram picks. If you haven't seen that, go check it out on Instagram before watching that part of the clip. But with that being said, lots of content to talk about today. Let's get things going. So 2 weeks into the season, obviously a pretty small sample size, but right off the gate, some division leaders. We've got the Calgary Flames leading the Pacific. The Winnipeg Jets have the Central right now. The Metro is divided between the Rangers and the Devils, tied at number 1, and the Florida Panthers are reigning champs, are still at number 1 in the Atlantic.
And if this first couple weeks tells us anything, it tells us that the Atlantic is going to be a bloodbath again. High intensity and very competitive in that division. It's going to be a fight to see who comes out on top. But yeah, the Calgary Flames are leading the Pacific Division. Vancouver got a taste of that first, losing their home opener to the Flames. They are 5-0-1. They have yet to lose in regulation. And Dan Vladar and Dustin Wolf are splitting that crease 50-50, but Dustin Wolf has looked unbelievable. 3 games, 3 wins. He has absolutely shut the door, and, he is maybe making a Calder run here. It's still very early, first 2 weeks, but definitely making a case for the Calder.
Like I said, small sample size. How sustainable is this for Calgary? Do you think they can go, a couple more weeks at, top 3 in the division?
It's tough to say, but morale's got to be at an all-time high in that dressing room. Huberdeau, I think, has had a 4-point game this year, so maybe he's, regaining some of that form he had a couple seasons back in Florida. I could see it going on for, maybe a couple weeks, 2 to 4 weeks until, the wheels start to fall off, but don't count this Calgary team out. I know we had them both low in our standings, but they could definitely make some noise down the stretch.
Another team you wanted to talk about, the Winnipeg Jets, undefeated. Connor Hellebuyck standing on his heads. Everything is going right for the Jets. Give me some insight.
Preseason, the big story was Hellebuyck letting in 8. I think it was against the Minnesota Wild. And everyone was kind of doubting the Jets, and they always do. I don't know why. I'm also guilty of it. I always seem to, the Jets kind of fly under the radar. But Hellebuyck has returned to Vezina form, and he has absolutely shut the door, like you said, and the Winnipeg Jets 6-0-0, the only team undefeated left in the NHL.
Yeah, we both put them kind of low on the division standings. And just based off of last playoffs, Connor Hellebuyck kind of just got lit up against Colorado in that first round. No one really knew how he was going to do going into this season, but like you said, he bounced back to his Vezina form. Both Morrissey and Pionk have been lighting it up points-wise for that defense. And their big guys are just, firing on all cylinders. Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, it's working out for the Winnipeg Jets in what should be a very solid Central Division with Colorado and Dallas also in there.
Speaking of bouncing back, Kenny, the Nashville Predators are 1-5. Stamkos has 1 point and it's 1 goal. Kenny, what is Nashville's outlook looking like for the rest of the season?
You got to think that they're going to sort of turn things around and, hopefully fight for a 3rd, 4th seed at this point. But what a terrible start it's been so far. I mean, all their free agent signings just haven't really, brought in what they were supposed to bring in. UC Saros kind of been letting out to dry so far in this season. But you got to think guys like Forsberg, guys like Yossi, even Steven Stamkos, hopefully they can bounce back and sort of carry this Preds team because, on paper, it's a good team. Maybe sort of figure out who that true number 2C is for that second line. But I got to think they can bounce back and squeak in 3rd, 4th seed at this point. Looking over to some player stats so far, Cale Makar leading the league, 14 points in the first 2 weeks. Kind of interesting. Colorado's doing so mediocre with Makar, McKinnon, and Rantanen all within the top 10 in point scoring this season. You got to think that majority of the reason that they're losing games is Alex Georgiev. Caden, give me some sort of insight. Like, do they need to get a starting goalie? Do they need to trade?
Yeah, I'm not too sure what's going on in Colorado. Obviously, one of the most top-heavy teams in the league. Like you mentioned, that big 3. But I also want to shout out Ross Colton. 6 goals and 1 assist for 7 points right now. He is on fire. A couple multi-goal games. He is looking really good. Hoping to, kind of bolster that depth and continue to produce for this Avalanche team. But yeah, Alexander Georgiev, just, the nickname Forgiev, it's really coming into fruition here. He has looked awful to start the year, but Justice Anunin has come in and he has shut the door. Back-to-back wins, maybe Colorado can build off of that, but they could look to acquire a goalie closer to the deadline if they feel they need to bring one in to make a playoff run.
It's just tough because at this point, like you're wasting prime years of McKinnon, you're wasting prime years of Rantanen, Makar, and Rantanen's contract's up. And by the sounds of it, he wants like Mitch Marner kind of money. He wants McKinnon kind of money. Just sort of sidetrack off of that. How much do you think Rantanen could grab? Even if he hits free agency, do you think he could hit more than McKinnon, 13 mil?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are a lot of reasons to stay in Colorado, getting to play with McKinnon, getting to play with Makar, and he would have to take a pay cut to make that work. But if he were to hit free agency, and with the cap going up, I think a contract, I think someone would definitely throw a bag at him. So north of 13 mil, I could definitely see happening.
Be pretty crazy, but like I said, they're just wasting these prime years right now. They got to sort of figure out the Georgiev situation, and because with a solid goaltender, that is a cup contender for sure. Another player I wanted to talk about, Matvey Michkov, leads or is tied for the lead for rookie points with 7. He shares that with Logan Stankoven of the Dallas Stars. He's looking really good, looking like an NHL regular already. But the Flyers, they're 1-5 so far. Not sort of typical from John Tortorella's right out of the gate kind of bag skating, making sure they're conditioned. But Michkov lighting it up for that Flyers team. He is a very fun player to watch.
Michkov comes just as promised, super creative, and he is producing for this Flyers team. But yeah, like you said, the Flyers, very slow start, and I'm used to seeing the Flyers come out flying because of that Tortorella conditioning. And their only win on the season, of course, is against the Canucks. But yeah, they started off hot last year, and it's just polar opposite here. Travis Konechny kind of been off his game a little bit. One of the bigger guys needs to lead for Philly, but it'll be interesting to see if they can bounce back.
Obviously, small sample size, but at this point already, has Michkov looked like the consensus number 2 from that draft?
I think so. Just purely based on skill and talent, I think he has to be. Like you said, small sample size, but he's shown no reasons why he'd be slowing down or regressing this year. Torts has given him the ice. He's given him everything he needs to succeed, and I think he'll continue that in Philly.
Yeah, no disrespect to Leo Carlson or Adam Fantilli, but Michkov looks like the real deal. And lastly, speaking of rookie scoring, Will Smith has 0 points so far in his first 6 games. He looks good, just can't get on the score sheet. And Celebrini had a very, very solid debut and has been out ever since. Just a really rocky start for both of these San Jose Shark rookies, and probably what could cost Celebrini a potential Calder at this point.
That injury kind of takes a hit for sure, and with how Michkov is playing, it's going to be tough to catch up. But yeah, this rough start is expected for both these rookies on a very abysmal San Jose Shark team, who did bring in some vets to try and aid with that, but obviously it's not enough. We saw Bedard play on a very rough Chicago team last year. They've improved quite a bit, brought in a ton of veterans. Look for San Jose to do the same in the coming years.
Moving on, we're going to go with hot or not lists, top 3 for each. I'm going to start, and we're going to go with an obvious one. I'm going to go with Artemi Panarin. 6 goals, 7 assists for 13 points so far in 2 weeks. Just an amazing pace so far, and it's showing because the Rangers are doing really well at the start of this season. Building off last season where he broke 100 points for the first time, it looks like he's going to do it again, and it looks like he's going to be a big reason for this team making it far in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a great pick. He's been absolutely elite. And I think what an even better pick was somebody taking him as their dark horse for the Hart Trophy this preseason. Shout out Kenny. But yeah, so my first hot player. Surprised when I looked at the stats. Haven't watched much Vegas hockey, but Mark Stone has 12 points in 7 games played. It is, a little unusual to see him playing during the regular season, but I guess it's still early enough where he can play. But all jokes aside, he has been elite. The two-way game he's one of the best in the game at it. So, good to see him 12 points in the 7 games.
Yeah, very solid from that top line in Vegas with Eichel and Barbashev really carrying their weight. Next up for me, we're going to go with a guy we already talked about. We're going to go with Connor Hellebuck. Just on an insane start to the season so far. So right now he's got a goals against average of 1.4, which is just unheard of, and a .948 save percentage. Obviously, both those numbers are going to balance out throughout the season. But as of right now, he is the number 1 goalie in the league, and you have to think he will be the starter for Team USA in the nation's face-off.
So at the end of the year, Kenny, how do you see his stats looking, and do you think he can go back-to-back for the Vezina Trophy?
I think it's very likely to go back-to-back. I don't think the numbers are sustainable. Obviously, I think that 1.4 sort of evens out, maybe reaches, maybe high ones, so maybe 1.9, maybe closer to 2. And then that save percentage, I think it's going to balance out to around maybe a 920. I think is very reasonable for him.
Yeah, great pick. He has been on his game to start the year. Going on to the next hot player, someone we thought was going to regress, might have been hungover from that Stanley Cup win. We're going to take Sam Reinhart here. Has 5 goals, good for 12 points in only 8 games. Thought he was going to regress. He's only 2 back of the league lead for goals. Yes, it is very early, but he has done very well in the absence of Alexander Barkov stepping up on that wing to produce.
Really good pick, and we talked about his contract at the in the off season. Thought it was a little bit, maybe a little bit too high, but right now it's looking like a great pay for him. Next, last one for me on who's hot. I'm gonna go with Gino Malkin. A very strong start to last season as well, and he's had a very good start this year as well. He's got 2 goals, 9 assists for 11 points. I think he famously said, like, I hope the season ends now so I can win the Art Ross last year, and it's looking like it could be the same case this year. Again, like Hellebuck, I expect those numbers to balance out. But he could be looking at 50, 60 point season, which would be great for him as they push towards bringing back Pittsburgh to the playoffs.
Yeah, that's a great pick, and that puts a smile on a lot of hockey fans' faces. A resurgence from Gino, someone that Kenny and I both grew up watching. And my last player for who's hot that I want to shout out, gonna go with Tage Thompson here. Point per game, he has 8 points in 8 games, and he's good for 5 goals. Is he back? Too early to tell, but love to see it out of the freak of nature that Thompson is.
Is he a 50 goal scorer this season?
I'm just getting flashbacks to last year of us gassing him up, going over whatever his line was, like mid, I think like high 80s for the points. 50 goals. I mean, right now, like based off of what we've seen, yes, but I think Buffalo as a team holds him back, so I think it'll be a fight for him to get to 50 for sure.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That is our who's hot pick 2 weeks into the year. Let's go to the who's not. I'll start things off with an older guy, but you still expect some points out of him. We got Brent Burns. 0 points so far on the season. He is on their number one deep pair, and he is on their power play. Although it is the second unit, it is still power play time. And with lots of skill around him, you would think he's racking up assists, maybe a couple goals. But 0-0-0 so far for him is just not a good look. Maybe age is catching up to him, and it would take that would be a pretty big hit to that defensive core in Carolina.
Yeah, as defensemen get older, the first thing we see go is that offensive production, but they're able to stay in the league because the defensive skills seem to stay. We'll see if Burns is able to adapt his game and stay in the league on a Carolina team that should be in the playoffs. So down the stretch, I'm sure he'll be able to step up and help them out. My first player for who is not hot, unfortunately, he is on my fantasy team. We're looking at Zach Hyman Kenny, who has yet to record a single point. Not a goal, not even a single point from Hyman. Yes, the Oilers, have been off to start the year, but like what is going on with Hyman? Kenny, do you see him turning this around?
Obviously, I do see him, turning things around and, putting the puck in the back end of that like he did last year. Do I think he can repeat as a 50 goal scorer? Probably not. I think he's good for, still 30, 35 goals. I think with bringing in guys like Skinner and Arvidsson, that will kind of balance out Zach Hyman's production. But it is a little bit concerning. He is on, a couple more years at that contract, and what looked like a very good contract last year, so far this year, hasn't paid ends. Going with my second pick, also, quick honorable mention to a teammate of Zach Hyman, Victor Arvidsson, 0 points as well. A big sort of a guy brought in for the second line for the Edmonton Oilers, just hasn't sort of put the puck in the back of the net like you're supposed to. But I've got who's not hot. I have what's my
I was gonna say honorable mention for who's not hot is crazy work.
no disrespect. I'm just saying. Second on my list, I gotta mention it. Steven Stamkos, like you said earlier, just the 1 goal so far. He's in -6, so obviously that 5-on-5 play did not get any better in the offseason. Not a surprise really for most people, but $8 million, you would expect a little more from him. But hopefully they can turn it around, and with Nashville starting to win some games, I think that will increase his numbers as well. But right now, not a hot player.
Old start and maybe underperforming to what we were expecting out of him this season, but I'm sure he'll bounce back just like the rest of the Nashville team. And I think he'll be fine down the stretch. He can catch fire going a little bit of a run. Next player who is not hot for me, from a production standpoint, hasn't been that bad, but to his standard, absolutely not. We're going to look at Leon Draisaitl, teammate of Zach Hyman. Only 6 points in 7 games, and he did get benched in one of the games briefly before scoring the OT winner. But yeah, you look at Draisaitl, you're thinking 120 points plus, over 100 for sure. And that's just not what he's shown so far through the 7 games, just the 6 points. And yes, Edmonton has been off, so I have no reason to believe that he won't bounce back. But just a tough watch through the first couple weeks for Oiler fans.
Yeah, it's a good pick. Obviously, signing that big contract, you'd expect, big season from him. The only thing Edmonton fans can hope for right now is, having a slow start last year and then making it the finals. Hopefully, it's sort of repeated this year, having a slow start and then, going the distance in the playoffs. Last one for me, I was going to go with Georgiev. We already kind of talked about him, so I'm going to go with a guy like similar to Draisaitl. Production standpoint, it's not terrible, but it's not up to his standards, and I think he's gotten a lot of hate. Some of it unnecessary. We're going to go with Elias Pettersson. Just the 3 assists so far this season, no goals, which is a bit concerning. And it seems like JT Miller's really kind of stepped up as that number 1 forward on that team, something that most people probably wouldn't have seen coming, especially after Pettersson signed that huge extension. So you kind of want to see Pettersson, be point per game at this point, have 2 or 3 goals. He's playing on a line with Hoglander. I think they've got some chemistry there, which hopefully they can build on that. But right now, it's just not enough, especially with that $11.6 million cap hit.
Yeah, it's tough, and he is also my last player on the Who's Not list. Just a super slow start. Can he bounce back? And I saw a stat. I think he has one 5-on-5 goal, Kenny, since signing that contract, and it was the game after signing that contract. I don't think we need to overreact to that, just something to keep in mind. But yeah, for a guy who has his jersey, not a great look, but I have faith that he will bounce back this year.
Yeah, it's a good insight. Hopefully he can turn things around. That is our top 3, who's hot and who's not. Let us know what you guys think and give us your picks for who's turning it on this season and who's having a slow start. Going over our standing predictions. If you haven't seen them, go check out our Instagram right now. We've got the full 1 to 8 for each division, as well as wildcard picks. Starting it off, I'm going to start with the Pacific Division. Caden, you've got Seattle sort of bouncing back, finishing 4th, and you've got LA dropping down to the 5th. Are you not you don't have confidence in LA anymore?
I'll start with LA. Their core guys from, the 2010s, Anze Kopitar, Drew Doughty, they're not getting any younger, so I think regression, obviously Doughty starting the year on IR, but I think regression for Kopitar is coming. He does have a hat trick this year, so not sure how that take is looking. But Darcy Kemper, the guy they brought in this offseason, trading away PLD for Kemper, is also injured, and I just don't have confidence in the Rittich-Copley tandem. I don't think it's a playoff team. Even bringing Kemper back in there, I just don't think you can make the playoffs. Looking at the Kings roster as a whole, when you have that tandem between the pipes, I just don't think it's enough. The Doughty injury adds to it, and I think they miss out this year. All right, Kenny, so my question in the Pacific Division for you. The Anaheim Ducks, a very young team, but you seem to be high on them. You have them in the 5. Talk about that a little bit. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I really like a lot of the pieces on the Anaheim core. A lot of young guys like your Leo Carlsons, like Claire Gauthier, Mason McTavish, Trevor Zegras. I think a lot of those guys are capable of taking steps forward, and even if only half of those guys do, there's enough of them that I think it could make a difference. I think having Dostal as your number 1, I think he can have really good potential this year and steal some games. And we'll see what happens with John Gibson, but having him as a backup isn't, anything to complain about. He is still a very solid goaltender. And another part that has to do with that is just sort of the weakness of the rest of the division. I don't have any confidence in San Jose yet, and obviously it's a bad take now with Calgary doing so well, but again, I don't really have too much confidence in them, and I could see Anaheim squeaking past both those teams. Going over, same conference, different division. I think Minnesota is coming back to the playoffs. And then adding on to that, do you think Colorado is strong enough to sort of fight for that 2nd seed?
Yeah, so we'll start with Minnesota. I think they are. I love that forward core. Boldy's healthy. You have Kaprizov leading the way. Even Zuccarello getting up there in age, but still producing. And then between the pipes, Philip Gustafsson has kind of emerged as that number 1, has that goalie goal, but he has also played very well for Minnesota. So yeah, I love what they've got going on in Mini. And yeah, I think it's enough to get them back in the playoffs after missing out last year. And then Colorado, yeah, at the two behind Dallas, they are very top heavy. And with the struggles with Georgiev between the pipes, I think if a Noonan can right the ship, I think they could definitely still be fighting for that two seed. Just not the start I was expecting from them. So we'll see how it all pans out. My question for you, same team actually. We're looking at the Minnesota Wild. You have them down at 7. And building off of that, you have the Blues in the 4 above both Minnesota and Winnipeg. Talk me through that.
Yeah, kind of just going against everything you said with Minnesota. They do have a very solid top line, but after that, I think the depth is kind of lacking and just not enough to be a playoff team. The defense, they do have some bright spots like your Brock Faber, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, but the goaltending as well. Gustafsson, he's had a good start so far, but based off of last season, I can't have too much confidence in him. And Fleury at this point, as legendary as he is just a backup goalie at this point. I'd love to see Wallstead get in some games, and I think that is very possible if they are, out of the playoffs at the 60-game mark, and they just want to get him some experience. But there are some stuff you said that I do agree with, and I can see them, surprising me and jumping up that line, that standings. But for now, I just don't have confidence in that Minnesota roster. And then after that, St. Louis, that was before the Thomas injury, so obviously that kind of takes a hit right now. But they do have a lot of solid, defensemen. Jordan Binnington had a great year last year, especially that tandem with Joel Hofer. I think they can really stand on their heads and steal some games. With Thomas in the lineup, they are a very solid team. Jake Neighbors and Jordan Kyrou kind of round out that top line, and I think they can really sort of carry that team to a potential playoff appearance. Going over to the Eastern Conference with the Atlantic Division, you still have Florida as the #1 seed. Looking like a great pick right now because that's where they're standing. But give me some sort of insight with the amount of losses that they had this offseason. How do you still have them at #1?
Yeah, so you look at we'll start with the blue line. So you look at OEL walking and also Montour obviously signing with the Kraken, big deal. And Bill Zito's hands were kind of tied. He's close to the cap. He brought back Reinhart, recently re-signed Verhaeghe, keeping the core together. With him being so restricted, what does he do? He goes out and gets Nate Schmidt and Adam Bokvist. Bokvist to quarterback that PP1, which I absolutely love. Replace Ekman Larson up there. I think Bokvist, still young, very high offensive ceiling, I think was a great move. And Nate Schmidt as well for, I think, league minimum. Great steal. The tandem isn't going to produce as well as Montour and OEL would have, but I think in that scenario, I think it was best case. I think they're both very serviceable. So I don't think those losses will hurt the Panthers too much. The Barkov injury definitely is, but Lundell is stepping up in a big way for this team. They're showing that they have the depth, and they're showing that's why they won a Stanley Cup. And, with the Atlantic being such a bloodbath, who knows how it ends, but I have confidence they can end at 1.
One follow-up question. You mentioned the Verhaeghe extension. What does that mean? I think it's about 7x7, somewhere close to that. What does that mean for Brock Besser's potential extension? Do
Well,
they have any relation? Do you think those are like similar players at all, or no?
yes, both great goal scoring threats on the wing. I think absolutely it's a good comparison. However, there's no state tax in Florida, as we've mentioned time and time again. With the Canadian tax in BC, we're not sure how Besser's agent can compare to that. But with the season Besser's having, I think he's shown that he can be a consistent goal scorer. So I could see him definitely getting more than Verhaeghe, looking at 8, maybe mid 8s, just relatively speaking.
Going to the Metro, you're not bought into Washington, huh? You don't think they can make the playoffs, and you have the Islanders over them?
Yeah, it's not looking great now considering the start Washington has had. But yeah, I was very high on the Islanders in the offseason. I thought the Duclair signing was one of the best in the league, and it flew very far under the radar. But now he's injured. But just the style of hockey that the Islanders play, very defensive minded, and they have some punch up front. They brought in Horvat a couple seasons ago, paired him with Barzell. The depth is getting a little older. Brock Nelson, Anders Lee, guys like that. So the scoring may be a problem. But I had a lot of hope in Sorokin and Varlamov as a tandem. I thought Sorokin would bounce back very nicely. We're only 2 weeks in, so that's why I had them a little higher than Washington. Just wasn't fully bought into the moves Washington made in the offseason, but they are proving me wrong off to a flying start. And my question for you, Kenny, was the Capitals at 4, and obviously that take looks great right now, but how do you feel about the rest of the season?
What we've seen so far can be a very good predictor for the rest of the season. I think their tandem is very solid with Lindgren and Logan Thompson. I think they're one of the cheapest tandems too, and both of them make very minimal money. And I think that's great for the rest of their ability to fill out the rest of the depth. And I think the guys they brought in, Matt Roy, Jacob Chikrin, Andrew Mangiapane, Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, the list just goes on, and those are big names, solid names to have in your second, third pair, and then second and third line. I'd like to see Ovechkin sort of pick things up a little bit and sort of chase that record, not just go for those empty net goals. But I'm fully bought into the Washington system, and with how good the top three teams are, I don't think any team can sort of jump past them. So I think Washington at 4 is a good pick. I did have a follow-up question for you though. We talked about a lot of teams outscoring your problems. For the Islanders, can you out-defend your offensive problems? Because at this point, they've been shut out 3 games so far this season. It's not a good stat at all. Do you think they have the goaltending and the defensive core to make up for just not scoring in the game?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, outscoring your problems and the Islanders being quite the opposite. You have to score to win games. That's just how hockey works. So I don't think they can out defend their problems. And I don't know how bad Duclair's injury is, but they definitely need some scoring punch up front. So maybe around the quarter way through the season, they could look to acquire a goal scorer because they desperately need it. And yeah, just talking about, they've been shut out 3 times this season, but one of the games was against the Red Wings and it was 1-0, and I think it went to overtime. So, watching Islander hockey, is not for the faint of heart. But to answer your question, no, I don't think they can just out defend their problems. They definitely need some scoring.
If you're Lou Lamoriello, you're in the GMC, are you going to sacrifice defense or maybe one of your 2 very solid goalies? And sort of defense, I mean, and Adam Pelech or maybe Ryan Pulak, you already have Noah Dobson there, so you have 3 very solid defensemen. Are you going to sacrifice any of those in a trade to bring in a big offensive piece?
Gonna say no. I don't think you want to sacrifice anything from this roster in order to succeed. I think just with the way the Islanders are built, I think you just continue to sacrifice the future. Lou's already on the hot seat, but picks, any prospects that they have left, I would look to move out just to bring in some scoring depth, a middle 6 guy who can put the puck in the net.
Yeah, I guess those are our season predictions. Again, if you haven't seen them, go check them out on our Instagram to get a little bit of context so that we're not just talking about random stuff. Let us know which picks you guys agree with, and make sure to comment on Instagram. That wraps up the content for the episode today, guys. Let us know what you guys think. Make sure to check us out on Instagram, posting a lot of stuff there. We got a lot of stuff coming up this season, lots of good content, big season ahead, lots of interesting storylines, so make sure you guys stay tuned.
Put in the work, but I don't be getting my flowers. You really thought she would be sweet? It's a whole nother level of sour.